Lenin was a monster. Communist apologists say, well, it wasn't Lenin. Lenin was a good guy. He was all motivated by love of the working class. It's like, well, his henchman was Stalin. And if your henchman is Stalin, you're not a good guy. So there's no celebrating Lenin. There's no we're cool, young, Marxist, hip revolutionaries, and he's our idol. It's like, there's none of that. Not if you know anything. Not if you're decent.
All right, Fred, you're a pretty hip young communist, so what do you think?
Well, this is an attempt, like they always do, to amalgamate two men who are very different, Lenin and Stalin, the purpose of which is to blame Lenin for everything that came later. The implicit idea behind all this is that if you try and carry out a socialist revolution, a workers' revolution, you will inevitably end up with a dictatorship. In the last period of Lenin's life, Lenin actually dedicated his attention to the question of the leadership of the party. Now, if Stalin was his henchman, you would think that he would do everything to defend Stalin's position. And yet we have the famous testament of Lenin, in which Lenin makes an attempt to actually remove Stalin. Stalin is too rude, and this defect, although quite tolerable in our midst and in dealing among us communists, becomes intolerable in a Secretary General. That is why I suggest that the comrades think about a way of removing Stalin from that post. Now, this is Lenin saying he should be removed as General Secretary. How can you then say he was Lenin's henchman? Lenin saw in Stalin organizational skills, which he clearly had, but he could see he had another side to him that could become dangerous, and did everything he could to have him removed. At one point, he came into conflict because Stalin insulted Lenin's wife. I mean, there was clearly a break taking place between the two. And Lenin even appealed to Trotsky to help him in forming a bloc to go to the Congress on these questions. Lenin, unfortunately, died early. And in the last months of his life, a lot of facts were kept from him consciously by Stalin, as Stalin was strengthening his grip on the bureaucracy.
We should also say that Stalin controlled Lenin's doctors for the period where he was most ill. Stalin actually had means, motive, and opportunity to silence Lenin. We can't prove anything, of course, but it was certainly convenient that Lenin died when he did.
That's right. He could then present himself, as he was still the General Secretary and had the apparatus in his hands, as the heir to Lenin. He was continuing in the traditions of Lenin and present that myth in the coming decades.
A myth that Jordan Peterson here accepts 100%.
That's right. But that was not the heritage of Lenin. The state that Lenin was fighting for was a state where all officials were elected with the right of recall, all officials to earn no higher than the wage of a skilled worker. These are the demands that Lenin listed in what should be the basic elements of a democratic worker state, not the imposition of a bureaucracy over the working class. I think even Trotsky, once said that if Stalin in that period, in the early period, had been shown what he would become like, he himself would have been shocked. He wasn't consciously working towards that. He was actually a product of the degeneration of the system. There is a huge difference between Lenin and Stalin.